The Galactic Council had existed for 12,000 years before humanity joined. In all that time, the rules had been simple. Species worked together when it helped them. They traded when it made them rich. They fought side by side when the enemy was too strong to face alone. But when the danger passed, the alliances ended. That was how things worked. That was how things had always worked. The Velthari were the oldest members of the council. They had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a shore. They had watched young species join the council with dreams of friendship and unity, only to learn the truth over time. Alliances were temporary. Friendship between species was a nice idea, but survival came first. Always. When humans arrived, the Velthari watched them with ancient eyes. These small, soft creatures from a blue world at the edge of the galaxy. They were weak compared to most council species. They had no natural armor like the Keth. They had no psychic powers like the Mindari. They could not survive in vacuum like the Psylocks, but they had something else. They had a strange fire in their hearts that the Velthari did not understand. Ambassador Alina Chen stood before the council on the day humanity was accepted as a member. She was small, even for a human. Her hair was gray with age, and her hands shook slightly as she held her speech. But her voice was strong. "We come to you as friends," she said. "We ask only to stand beside you, to learn from you, and to help you when you need us. This is our promise. When we say we are your allies, we mean it. Not for a year, not for a decade, forever." The council members made sounds of polite agreement. The Velthari elder, whose name was Korthax, leaned back in his floating chair. He had heard such words many times before. All young species said them. All young species learned better. 5 years passed. Humanity proved to be useful members of the council. They were clever traders. They were good at solving problems. They had a strange talent for making different species work together. But they were still young, still naive. The council was patient. They would learn. Then the burning came. No one knew where the burning started. Some said it was a weapon test gone wrong. Others said it was a natural disaster from deep space. But it did not matter where it came from. What mattered was that it was destroying everything in its path. The burning was a wall of radiation and fire that moved through space like a slow wave. It killed everything it touched. Planets, moons, space stations, ships, nothing survived, and it was heading straight for the Keth homeworld. The Keth were warriors. They had thick, rocky skin and 4 powerful arms. They had been the military strength of the council for thousands of years. But against the burning, their strength meant nothing. You cannot fight radiation with fists. You cannot punch away a wall of fire that is 10 light years wide. The council met in emergency session. The Keth representative, a massive creature named Gorth, stood before them. His voice, usually so strong, was quiet with fear. "We ask for help," he said. "We need ships to evacuate our people. We need worlds to shelter them. We need time." The council debated for 3 days. The Velthari argued for caution. Moving billions of Keth to other worlds would be expensive. It would strain resources. It would cause problems. The Mindari agreed. The Psylocks pointed out that the Keth had plenty of ships of their own. Why should others sacrifice for them? On the 3rd day, the human ambassador stood up. It was not Alina Chen anymore. She had retired. The new ambassador was a young man named Marcus Wright. He was tall, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to burn with an inner light. "I have listened to 3 days of debate," he said. 3 days of talking about costs and resources and problems, but I have not heard anyone talk about what really matters. The Keth are our allies. They are our friends. Their world is about to die, and their children will burn with it. And we are sitting here talking about money. The council fell silent. No one spoke to them like this. "Humanity will send every ship we have," Marcus continued. "We will open our worlds to every Keth who needs shelter. We will give everything we can give because that is what alliance means. Not when it is easy, not when it is cheap, always." The Velthari elder Korthax made a sound of amusement. Pretty words, young ambassador. But humanity has only been part of this council for 5 years. You have limited resources, limited ships. What can you really offer? Marcus smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Watch us. Within 1 week, humanity mobilized its entire fleet. Every transport ship, every cargo vessel, every passenger liner was sent to the Keth homeworld. The humans did not ask for payment. They did not ask for promises. They simply came. But it was not enough. The Keth numbered in the billions. Humanity had only a few thousand ships. At the rate they were moving, millions would still be left behind when the burning arrived. Marcus sent a message to Earth. The response came within hours. Humanity began converting military ships for transport. They stripped out weapons and installed life support. They packed Keth refugees so tight that there was barely room to stand. Human crew members gave up their quarters, their food, their water. They slept in hallways and ate emergency rations while Keth families took their beds. Other council species watched in confusion. This was not how things were done. Alliances were supposed to be balanced. Give and take. You helped others so they would help you later. But the humans were giving everything and asking for nothing. The Mindari representative approached Marcus at the evacuation center. She was a tall, thin creature with silver skin and large black eyes. Her people could sense emotions, and what she felt from the humans disturbed her. "You are destroying your economy," she said. "Your people will suffer for years because of this. Why do you continue?" Marcus was tired. He had not slept in 3 days, but he looked at her with those burning eyes and said, "Because they need us. What other reason do we need?" The Mindari did not understand, but she felt something in those words, something she had never felt from any species before. It frightened her. 2 weeks before the burning reached the Keth homeworld, the other council species began to send ships, not because they were ordered to, not because it made economic sense, but because they had watched the humans sacrifice everything and they felt something strange in their hearts. Some called it shame, others called it inspiration, but whatever it was, it made them move. The Keth were saved. Not all of them, but most. 12 billion souls were carried away from their dying world on ships from a dozen different species. And when the burning finally swallowed the Keth homeworld, turning it to ash and silence, the Keth people lived on. They lived on because humanity had taught the galaxy something it had forgotten. Alliance was not a business deal. It was not a temporary convenience. It was a promise, and promises meant something. 50 years passed after the burning. The Keth rebuilt their civilization on a new world they called Second Home. They never forgot what humanity had done for them. Every year, on the anniversary of the evacuation, they held a ceremony. They spoke human names and told human stories. They taught their children that when darkness came, it was the humans who had brought the light. But the galaxy was changing. The Council had survived for 12,000 years by being careful, by being practical, by never risking too much. Humanity's actions during the burning had disturbed that careful balance. Some species looked at the humans with new respect. Others looked at them with fear. The Dreth were one of the fearful ones. The Dreth were an old species, almost as old as the Velthari. They were tall and thin, with pale gray skin and 6 eyes that saw everything. They had built their power through careful planning and clever manipulation. They did not fight wars themselves. They convinced others to fight for them. They made deals, broke deals, and made new deals. That was their way. The humans confused them. The humans did not follow the rules. They did not act in their own self-interest. They gave away resources for nothing. They made promises and actually kept them. The Dreth did not understand such behavior, and what they did not understand, they feared. High Chancellor Vethais of the Dreth called a secret meeting. Only the oldest and most powerful species were invited. The Velthari came because they always came to such meetings. The Mindari came because they were curious. The Psylocks came because they wanted to see what would happen. "The humans are a problem," Vethais said. His 6 eyes moved independently, watching each guest. They are changing the council. They are making other species believe in ideas, dangerous ideas. The Velthari elder Korthax, who was now very old indeed, made a sound of agreement. I have watched them for 50 years. They are not like us. They form bonds that do not break. They make sacrifices that make no logical sense. And worst of all, they are teaching others to do the same. The Mindari representative, a young female named Silis, leaned forward. Is that truly so dangerous? The evacuation of the Keth was a remarkable achievement. Billions were saved. And that is exactly the problem, Vethai said. Before the humans came, everyone understood the rules. Help was temporary. Alliances were practical. No one expected too much from anyone else. But now other species are starting to expect more. They are starting to believe that we should sacrifice for each other. They are starting to believe in forever. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. The humans must be contained, Vethais continued. Not destroyed. That would be too obvious, but limited, controlled. We must show the galaxy that their way is foolish, that the old ways are better. Korthax nodded slowly. And how do you propose to do this? Vethais smiled with too many teeth. We find a situation where the humans cannot help, where their promises mean nothing, where their precious forever breaks like glass. The Psylocke's representative, a crystalline being named Prex, made a sound like grinding stones. And if the humans do not break? They will break, Vethais said. Everything breaks eventually. We just need to find the right pressure. The right pressure came 3 years later, in the form of a small species called the Nelath. The Nelath were not members of the Council. They lived in a system at the very edge of explored space, far from the trade routes and political centers. They were small, furry creatures with big eyes and gentle hearts. They had no military. They had no defenses. They had only their world and their simple lives. They also had something else. Their world sat on top of the largest deposit of crystallized nexium ever discovered. Nexium was the most valuable substance in the galaxy. It powered the fastest ships, the strongest weapons, the most advanced technology, and the Nelath had enough of it to make entire empires wealthy beyond measure. The Dreth saw an opportunity. They approached the Nelath with friendly words and generous offers. They offered to protect the little species from the dangers of the galaxy. They offered to help them mine the nexium and trade it for wonderful things. All the Nelath had to do was sign a simple agreement, a partnership, an alliance. The Nelath were not fools. They could see the greed in the Dreth's many eyes. They refused the offer. So the Dreth tried a different approach. A fleet of pirates appeared in Nelath space. They were not Dreth, of course. They were mercenaries, hired quietly and paid well to cause trouble. They raided Nelath ships. They destroyed Nelath stations. They killed Nelath people by the thousands. The Nelath sent a desperate message to the Galactic Council. They begged for help. They offered to join the Council, to give anything, to do anything, if only someone would save them. The Council debated. The Dreth argued that the Nelath were too far away, too primitive, too unimportant. The Velthari agreed that intervention would be expensive and risky. The Psylocks pointed out that the pirates had done nothing to Council species, so it was not really the Council's problem. Ambassador Marcus Wright, now an old man with white hair and tired eyes, stood up to speak. But before he could say a word, High Chancellor Vethais interrupted. We all know what the humans will say. They will promise to help. They will send ships and resources they cannot afford. They will sacrifice themselves for strangers. Vethais made a sound of contempt. But the Nelath system is 3 months away at fastest speed. By the time human ships arrive, the Nelath will be dead or conquered. This time, pretty words will not be enough. Marcus looked at Vethais for a long moment. Then he looked around the council chamber, at all the species who had once watched humanity save the Keth, and who now sat silent and afraid. You are right, Marcus said quietly. Our ships cannot reach the Neleth in time, but that does not mean they will face this alone. He pressed a button on his console. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a map of the galaxy, with lines connecting dozens of worlds. 50 years ago we saved the Keth, Marcus said. We did not do it for payment. We did not do it for power. We did it because it was right. And in 50 years we have made friends across this galaxy. Friends who remember. Friends who believe in something more than profit and survival. The lines on the map began to glow. Ship movements appeared, converging from all directions toward Nelath space. The Keth are sending their fleet. They will arrive in 2 weeks. Marcus pointed to another line. The Mindari are sending medical ships and rescue teams. The Psylocks are sending mining vessels to help the Neleth build defenses. He looked directly at Vethais. Even the Velthari are sending observers, because what happens in Neleth space matters, because alliance means something. Vethais felt his 6 eyes widen in shock. This was not supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to be alone. The humans were supposed to fail. You planned this, he said. You knew about the pirates. Marcus smiled. It was the same smile his predecessor had given 50 years ago, not friendly, not warm, but burning with that strange fire that humans carried in their hearts. We did not plan it, Marcus said. We suspected it, and we prepared. Because that is what alliance means, High Chancellor. It means watching out for each other. It means being ready. It means fighting for each other forever, whether the Council approves or not. The pirate fleet was destroyed before it could do more damage. The Neleth joined the Council and became close friends with humanity, and the Dreth learned something important that day. You cannot break something that does not follow your rules. You cannot shatter bonds that are stronger than logic. But they did not give up. The Dreth never gave up. They simply waited for another opportunity. And in the darkness of space, far from the light of council debates, they began to plan something much, much worse. The war came without warning. 100 years after humanity joined the council, the Vox arrived. No one knew where they came from. No one knew what they wanted. They simply appeared at the edge of the galaxy, a massive fleet of black ships that blotted out the stars. They did not negotiate. They did not demand. They simply attacked. The first world to fall was a Psylocks mining colony, 10 million crystalline beings, shattered into dust in a single day. The second world was a Mindari research station. The third was a Dreth trading post. The fourth was a human settlement. The council met in emergency session for the first time in decades. Fear filled the chamber like a thick fog. The ancient species, who had survived for thousands of years by being careful and practical, did not know what to do. They had never faced an enemy that could not be bargained with, that could not be reasoned with, that simply wanted to destroy. The new human ambassador was a young woman named Sarah Chen. She was the great-great-granddaughter of Alina Chen, the first human ambassador. She had her ancestors' gray eyes and her quiet strength. We need to work together, she said, all of us, not as separate species protecting our own interests, but as one force, one army, one alliance. The Dreth High Chancellor, a descendant of Vethais named Caleth, made a sound of disgust. Easy words from a species that has nothing to lose. Humanity has only a handful of worlds. We have hundreds. We cannot risk everything on some romantic idea of unity. Sarah looked at him with those gray eyes. The Vox do not care how many worlds you have. They do not care how old your species is or how clever your plans are. They are coming for all of us, and if we do not stand together, they will destroy us one by one. Then let them destroy the weak first, Caleth said. The strong will survive. That is the way of things. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. She looked around at every representative, every species, every face. 100 years ago, my ancestor stood in this place and made a promise. She said that humanity would stand beside you forever. that we would help you when you needed us, that when we said alliance, we meant it." She paused. "Many of you thought those were pretty words, empty words. You thought we would learn better. You thought we would become like you, practical and careful and alone." Sarah shook her head. "You were wrong. We have not changed. We have not learned to be selfish, and we will not start now." She turned to face Caliph directly. "You ask what humanity has to lose. The answer is everything. Our worlds, our people, our future. But we are not going to hide and hope the Vox eat someone else first. We are going to fight. And we are going to fight for everyone. Not because it makes sense, not because we will win, but because that is who we are." She walked back to her seat. "You can join us or you can watch, but we are going to war." The council voted. The result was closer than it should have been. But in the end, most species chose to fight together, even the Dreth, who had no other choice. The war lasted 20 years. It was not a war of great battles and clever strategies. It was a war of survival. The Vox were stronger, faster, and more numerous than anyone had imagined. They destroyed worlds like a child crushing insects. They did not stop. They did not tire. They simply kept coming. But they had never faced something like the human alliance. The Keth remembered what humanity had done for them. They fought at the front lines, their rocky bodies breaking against the Vox weapons, buying time for others to escape. The Mindari used their psychic powers to coordinate fleets across vast distances. The Psylocks built defenses that could withstand attacks that would shatter mountains. And humanity did what humanity had always done. They gave everything. They sacrificed everything. They fought for their allies with every breath and every drop of blood. General Thomas Park led the human forces. He was an old soldier, scarred and tired, but his eyes still burned with that strange fire. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the Vox fleet approach. "We are outnumbered 10-1, his second-in-command said. "If we fight here, we will lose." Thomas nodded. "I know." "Then why are we fighting?" Thomas looked at the tactical display. Behind his fleet, a convoy of refugee ships was fleeing toward safety. 30 million lives from a dozen different species. If his fleet retreated, the Vox would catch them. If his fleet stayed, the Vox would destroy them. "Because they need time," Thomas said, "and we can give it to them." The battle lasted 6 hours. The human fleet was destroyed. Every ship, every crew, every life. General Thomas Park died on his bridge, giving orders until the very end. But the convoy escaped. 30 million lives saved because humanity kept its promise. The news spread across the galaxy. Stories of human sacrifice had become common during the war, but this was different. This was an entire fleet choosing to die so that others could live, not their own people, others. Something changed after that day. The war did not become easier. The Vox did not become weaker. But the species of the Council began to fight differently. They began to fight together in a way they never had before. The Dreth sent their best ships to protect Mindari colonies. The Velthari shared ancient weapons technology they had kept secret for millennia. The Psylocks gave their crystalline bodies to build defensive networks around worlds that were not their own. They had learned something from humanity. They had learned that alliance was not a word. It was a choice to put others before yourself, a choice to fight for something bigger than survival. And slowly, incredibly, the tide of the war began to turn. The final battle of the Vox War took place in the Arthenix system. It was a dead system, with no planets, no resources, nothing of value. But it was where the Vox had gathered their remaining fleet, and it was where the Council would make its stand. 3,000 ships from 40 different species assembled at the edge of the system. It was the largest fleet in galactic history, and at its center, leading the way, were the humans. Ambassador Sarah Chen had died in the 3rd year of the war, killed when the Vox destroyed the Council station. The new human ambassador was her son, David Chen. He was young for an ambassador, only 30 years old. But he had grown up in war, and he carried the same fire that his ancestors had carried. David stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive vessel named Hope. Around him, officers from a dozen species worked together as if they had known each other all their lives. A Keth weapons officer, a Mindari communications specialist, a Silox navigator, even a Dreth tactical advisor who had once been trained to hate humanity. "The Vox fleet is moving," the Mindari reported. "They are coming straight at us." David nodded. "Let them come, we will meet them." The Dreth advisor, whose name was Zelkith, looked at David with his 6 eyes. "You are not afraid," he said. It was not a question. "Of course I am afraid," David said. "I am terrified, but fear does not change what we have to do." Zelkith was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that no Dreth had ever said to a human before. "I am honored to serve beside you, Ambassador." David smiled. "Call me David. If we are going to die together, we might as well be friends." The battle began. It was chaos. It was fire and light and death on a scale that no one could truly comprehend. Ships exploded like stars dying. Weapons that could destroy planets tore through shields and armor. Thousands died in the first minute, tens of thousands in the first hour. But the Council fleet did not break. They held the line. They fought together, species that had been enemies for millennia standing side by side against the darkness. The Vox pushed harder. They were desperate now, sensing that this was their last chance. They threw everything they had at the Council fleet, and slowly, terribly, the line began to bend. David watched the tactical display with burning eyes. They were losing. They were going to lose. Everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed, it was all going to end here in this dead system. Then a new signal appeared on the display. "What is that?" David asked. The Mindari communications officer looked confused. "It is coming from everywhere, Ambassador. Every frequency, every channel, it is." She stopped. Her large black eyes went wide. "It is everyone," she said. "Every species in the Council, every world, they are sending everything." David looked at the display again. New ships were appearing at the edge of the system. Not hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. Ships of every size and shape from every corner of the galaxy. Mining vessels and transport ships and passenger liners. Vessels that had no business in a war zone, crewed by people who had never fired a weapon in their lives. They had come anyway. A message came through from the lead ship. It was a civilian freighter, captained by an old Velthari named Korthax the Younger, grandson of the Elder who had once watched humanity with ancient, skeptical eyes. "Ambassador Chen," Korthax said, "we have come to help all of us, because alliance means forever, because you taught us that." David felt tears running down his face. He did not wipe them away. "Welcome to the battle," he said. "Let us end this together." The tide turned. It was not a dramatic reversal. It was a slow, grinding push, paid for in blood and fire. But the Vox were finally outnumbered. They were finally outfought, not by strategy or superior weapons, but by something they could not understand. They were outfought by love. The last Vox ship was destroyed at dawn on the second day of the battle. When it exploded, a cheer went up across the galaxy. A cheer that crossed species and languages and the vast distances of space. They had won. David Chen stood on the Bridge of Hope and looked at the stars. So many had died. So many more would have died if they had not stood together. If humanity had not taught them that alliance meant something more than convenience. Zelkith stood beside him. The Dreth's 6 eyes were wet with tears. "My ancestors tried to destroy you," he said. "They thought you were dangerous because you believed in things that did not make sense, because you kept promises that cost you everything." David nodded. "They were right, we were dangerous." "Yes," Zelkith said, you are, but not in the way they feared." He turned to face David directly. You were dangerous because you made us better. You made us believe in something more than survival. You taught us that the galaxy could be more than a collection of species fighting for scraps. He paused. You taught us how to be allies, real allies, forever. David smiled through his tears. That is all we ever wanted, he said. That is all we ever asked, to stand beside you, to fight for you, to be your friends not for a year or a decade but for as long as the stars burn. He looked out at the galaxy, at the countless worlds and species and lives that had been saved because humanity had refused to give up on them. Forever, he said, that is what alliance means. And the galaxy finally understood. 1,000 years later, the Galactic Council still existed, but it was not the same council that humanity had joined so long ago. It was something new, something better. The old ways had died in the fires of the HFY War. The careful calculations, the temporary alliances, the practical selfishness. They had been burned away, replaced by something stronger. The council now operated on a simple principle, taught by humanity and paid for in blood by countless species across countless generations. Alliance means forever. When one species suffers, all species help. When one world burns, every world sends aid. When darkness comes, the light comes from everyone together. The great memorial stood at the center of council space. It was a massive structure, built from materials donated by every species in the galaxy. It listed the names of all who had died in the HFY War, all who had sacrificed themselves so that others could live. At the top of the memorial, in letters that could be seen from orbit, were the words that had changed the galaxy. Alliance means fighting for each other forever. And below them, smaller but no less important, taught by humanity, believed by all. Tourists came from every world to see the memorial. Young beings of every species stood before the names and learned the stories. They learned about General Thomas Park, who gave his fleet to save 30 million strangers. They learned about Ambassador Sarah Chen, who died defending the council she loved. They learned about David Chen, who led the final battle and wept when they won. But most of all, they learned about the idea. The strange, impractical, impossible idea that had changed everything. The idea that you could make a promise and mean it. That you could fight for others even when it cost you everything. That alliance was not a word or a contract or a temporary convenience, but a bond that would never break. The humans were still part of the council, of course. They had grown and spread and changed over the centuries. They had married into other species and adopted alien children and built communities across the galaxy. But they were still humans. They still carried that strange fire in their hearts. The current human ambassador was named Elena Park Chen, a descendant of both the Parks and the Chens who had shaped galactic history. She was old now, her hair white and her steps slow, but her eyes still burned. She stood before the council on the anniversary of the HFY War's end. Around her, representatives from 100 species waited to hear her speak. They were not the suspicious, selfish beings that their ancestors had been. They were allies. They were friends. They were family. 1,000 years ago, Elena said, my ancestors came to this council and made a promise. They said that humanity would stand beside you forever, that we would fight for you, sacrifice for you, die for you if necessary. That when we said alliance, we meant it. She paused and looked around the chamber. Some of you thought they were naive. Some of you thought they were fools. Some of you tried to break them, to prove that their ideas were worthless in a universe built on survival and self-interest. Elena smiled. You were wrong. They were not naive. They were not fools. They were simply the first to remember something that all of us knew deep in our hearts but had been afraid to believe, that we are stronger together, that love is more powerful than fear, that the bonds we choose to make are stronger than the bonds we are born with. She raised her hand, and the lights in the chamber dimmed. The ceiling became transparent, showing the stars that burned overhead. Look at those stars, Elena said. 1,000 years ago, half of them were controlled by the Vox. Their light was the light of destruction. Now they are homes, gardens, nurseries for species yet unborn, not because we conquered them, but because we saved them, together. She lowered her hand. That is the legacy of humanity, not our ships or our technology or our military might. Our legacy is the idea, the simple, powerful, unbreakable idea that alliance means forever, that when we say we are your friends, we mean it, that when we promise to fight for you, we will keep that promise even if it costs us everything. She walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the assembled representatives. The Vox are gone, the darkness is past, but there will be other challenges, other dangers, other enemies. And when they come, we will face them together, not as humans or Keth or Mindari or Dreth, not as separate species looking out for ourselves, but as allies, as friends, as family. She smiled one last time. Forever, because that is what alliance means, because that is what humanity taught the galaxy, and because, in the end, we all learned together. The council rose to its feet. 100 species, speaking 100 languages, raising their voices in a single word. Forever. And in the silence that followed, the stars burned on. They burned for all the lives that had been lost and all the lives that had been saved. They burned for the promise that had been made and the promise that had been kept. They burned for an alliance that would never end. Because humanity had taught the galaxy something that could never be forgotten, something that would last as long as there were beings to remember it. Alliance means fighting for each other forever. And the galaxy finally and completely believed.